Hi everyone, and welcome back to Crime Whisper, your safe space to unwind with deeply told true crime stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or drift off to sleep, so go ahead and get cozy. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it where you are? Alright? Take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's first story. Case 1. The tragic case of Yasi Correa. Yasi Correa was born in Praia, Cabo Verde. When she was just 3 years old, her family moved to the United States, eventually settling in Boston. She grew up in the Dorchester neighborhood and made the city her home. As she got older, Yasi became a loving and devoted mother to her daughter, Gabriela. But behind her warm smile and gentle spirit, Yasi faced heartbreaking struggles. She had been in a relationship with a man named Miguel Castro, who physically abused her. Although she wanted to leave him, Miguel wouldn't let her go, and his violence escalated. Eventually, Yasi reported him to the police. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison. To support herself and her daughter, Yasi worked as a waitress at Del Frisco's, a well-known restaurant in Boston. In her free time, she loved dancing, photography, and spending every possible moment with little Gabriela, especially during their cherished park visits. On the evening of February 23, 2019, Yasi was in a celebratory mood. It was her birthday. She dressed up in a new orange jumpsuit, left her daughter with family, and headed out to celebrate with friends at a nightclub in Boston's Theater District. They danced, toasted with champagne, and shared laughter into the early morning hours. But after the club closed, Yasi and her friends parted ways, and she was left alone. She never made it home that night. For 2 long days, there was silence. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her family became increasingly concerned. Then, on February 26th, Yasi's father, Juan Correa, and a close friend went to the police to report her missing. Boston police launched an immediate investigation. Detectives began with CCTV footage from around the club, trying to trace Yasi's final known steps. One video showed her, just after 2 a.m., visibly intoxicated, speaking with several people outside the nightclub on Tremont Street. She accidentally got into an Uber that she hadn't ordered. The driver, confused and frustrated, pushed her out of the car. As she stood there, disoriented, a man approached her. He took her hand and led her away from the area. Despite Yasi appearing reluctant, she didn't break away. The footage showed her even jumping onto his back, playfully, before he carried her to a nearby red car. They drove off, and that was the last time she was seen alive. Police soon identified the man as Louis D. Coleman III, a 32-year-old with a master's degree in physics and no prior criminal history. He lived in Providence, Rhode Island, about 50 miles from the Boston nightclub. The red car he drove was registered to his mother in California. When officers arrived at Coleman's residence, he was already gone, but surveillance footage from the building revealed chilling evidence. At 4:15 a.m., roughly 2 hours after he left with Yasi, Coleman returned to his apartment. Security footage showed him carrying what appeared to be an unconscious woman, or possibly a body, with long hair and orange clothing, into the building. Special Agent Thomas Zukaskas of the FBI later described the footage, confirming that it showed Coleman entering with someone matching Yasi's appearance, held in his arms. Over the next couple of days, Coleman was seen coming and going from the building multiple times. Footage from February 26th, the same day Yasi was officially reported missing, showed Coleman making a disturbing purchase at Walmart. He bought items, including protective suits, bleach duct, and electrical tape gloves, safety goggles, candles, a mask. The next night, he returned to Walmart to purchase a large suitcase and a canister. On February 28th, Coleman was seen on camera at 2:15 a.m., struggling to lift the suitcase, the same one he had purchased, into the trunk of his car. Police obtained a warrant, and searched his apartment. They discovered several troubling items, including respirator masks and hooded coveralls. One couch cushion was missing from his sofa. In a dumpster outside, they found bleach-stained jeans, plastic sheets, gloves, duct tape, a used sponge, and empty packages for car air fresheners and purifying charcoal. Later that day, Delaware State Police pulled over Coleman's vehicle in Wilmington. When asked if he was alone, he reportedly said something no officer forgets: "She's in the trunk." Inside, they found the body of Yossi Correa, wrapped in a black trash bag, placed inside the large suitcase, and further concealed with a sofa cushion cover. Forensic analysis revealed that Yossi had died from a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma. Her final hours were marked by violence, fear, and betrayal. Lewis Coleman was arrested at the scene and charged with kidnapping resulting in death. A federal crime. Case 1. Justice for Yossi Correa. Further forensic analysis revealed that seminal fluid was found on Yossi's body. DNA testing confirmed it matched Lewis Coleman. Additionally, his DNA was discovered beneath her fingernails, suggesting a struggle had occurred. While investigators were unable to confirm the exact location of Yossi's death, they believed it happened either in Coleman's vehicle or inside his apartment. On Saturday, March 9, 2019, the community came together to say goodbye. Family, friends, and supporters gathered at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester to honor Yossi Correa's memory. Many wore white or donned custom shirts, pins, and sweatshirts bearing her photo and the message, "Justice for Yossi." Her cousin and best friend, Maka Dandred, delivered the first eulogy, speaking on behalf of a grieving community. She said, "We may not understand why Yossi's life was taken so soon, but I believe her death was not in vain. I trust in God's plan, and I have faith in that." Boston Mayor Marty Walsh also addressed the mourners, pledging to help create a world where women can enjoy a night out and return home safely. He acknowledged the immense sorrow Yossi's family endured and expressed heartfelt condolences. Her father, Juan Correa, thanked the city and law enforcement for their relentless efforts in finding the truth. Speaking directly to his daughter, he said, "Rest in paradise, my dear Yossi. Rest in peace, my precious child." Louis Coleman was officially charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a federal crime that can carry either the death penalty or life in prison. However, prosecutors announced they would not be seeking capital punishment. During the trial, prosecutors presented chilling evidence, including surveillance footage of Coleman dragging Yossi's body into his apartment, along with disturbing online searches he made shortly afterward. He had researched topics such as, can a person fit inside a suitcase? How to pull out a tooth that isn't loose? Coleman's defense attorneys pushed back, arguing that this content was irrelevant to the charge of kidnapping. They claimed the government focused too heavily on his behavior after Yossi's death, rather than proving the alleged kidnapping itself. Attorney David Hughes stated, "This case isn't about what Mr. Coleman did after her death. The prosecution has centered its evidence on that, but it doesn't prove a kidnapping occurred." Court documents from both sides painted differing versions of the truth. The prosecution claimed Coleman lured Yossi into his car by pretending to offer her a ride, ultimately killing her. They emphasized that Yossi had not been the aggressor. The defense, however, argued that Yossi became aggressive after being kicked out of the Uber, claiming she started a fight with Coleman and that what followed was a spontaneous confrontation, not a premeditated crime. Still, prosecutors reminded the jury that Yossi weighed just 119 pounds, while Coleman weighed over 200 pounds, and that she had no chance of overpowering him. The autopsy revealed that in addition to alcohol, Yossi had consumed multiple prohibited substances, which may have affected her condition the night of her disappearance. Despite the defense's efforts, in June 2022, Louis Coleman was found guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. His legal team filed a motion to overturn the verdict, but the judge upheld the conviction, In October 2022, Coleman, then 36 years old, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was also ordered to pay $60,000 in restitution to Yassi's family. Case 2. The tragic deaths of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Carta on January 3, 1995. The peaceful area around Juliet Lake in Georgia was shaken by a grim discovery. A passerby walking near the lake spotted something unusual too: lifeless bodies. Local law enforcement responded quickly, though they were unprepared for such a violent crime. Until then, the area had only dealt with small-town problems, minor thefts, or neighborhood disputes. At the scene, deputies found a white Honda Civic parked near the water's edge. Inside the driver's seat was the body of a man. Just outside the vehicle, a young woman lay, motionless on the ground nearby. Both had been shot. The victims were soon identified through personal belongings inside the car. The male was 22-year-old Grant Hendrickson, and the female was 19-year-old Michelle Carta. The crime scene told a chilling story. Grant had suffered 3 gunshot wounds, suggesting he was killed instantly. Michelle had been shot twice, and, based on her body's positioning, investigators believed she may have remained conscious after the attack. Michelle's body was found partially exposed, her skirt lifted, and her legs positioned unnaturally apart. These disturbing details pointed to a possible sexual motive behind the crime. Michelle and Grant were both known and loved by their communities. Grant Hendrickson, born in September 1972 in Monroe, Georgia, was an avid outdoorsman. He loved fishing, camping, golf, and canoeing. He also gave back to the community, working as a museum volunteer from the age of 15. Michelle Carta, born in May 1975 in Monterey, California, was equally accomplished. She was a dedicated student and athlete, playing in the school marching band, competing in tennis, leading her softball team, and being inducted into the National Honor Society. Outside of school, Michelle volunteered with the Red Cross, supported animal welfare, and frequently visited the elderly. Her father recalled that she hoped to study medicine, driven by a strong desire to help others. Their promising futures were stolen in an act of violence that remains etched into the hearts of everyone who knew them. Case 2. Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Carta. Forensic experts determined that although the perpetrator may have intended to sexually assault Michelle, no such act was carried out. Instead, they discovered a saliva sample containing chewing tobacco residue on the inside of her thighs. That sample was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. At the crime scene, investigators made another critical discovery: spent bullet casings from 2 different calibers, 13.223 caliber casings, 4 9mm casings. This suggested the likelihood of 2 separate firearms being used and possibly 2 perpetrators, each armed with a different weapon. The families of Grant and Michelle were devastated by the news. As only children, they were incredibly close to their parents and had been in a loving relationship for over a year. They had already begun planning their future together, including their upcoming wedding. Detectives first turned to those closest to the couple: friends, family, classmates, searching for any clues or potential conflicts. But Grant and Michelle were well liked, had no known enemies, and lived relatively quiet lives. In the days that followed, investigators visited Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where the couple were both students, hoping to uncover leads. But no relevant information surfaced. A theory was briefly explored that perhaps someone had romantic interest in Michelle and acted out after being rejected, but this was soon dismissed for lack of evidence. As police began reconstructing the couple's final day, January 2nd, 1995, a clearer timeline emerged. Grant and Michelle had dinner at a local restaurant, followed by a movie. Afterward, they drove to Juliet Lake, a nearby public recreation area that remained open 24/7. It offered a parking area, a small dock, picnic tables, and access to the water, but no staff or surveillance. Other visitors were present that night, though none reported anything suspicious. A few recalled hearing loud pops, which they dismissed as firecrackers. One witness, however, mentioned seeing a 1980s Honda CRX speeding away from the lot shortly after the time of the crime. Meanwhile, the DNA found in the saliva on Michelle's body remained unmatched. At the time, DNA technology was still in its infancy, and national databases like CODIS were not yet fully operational. That meant the sample could only be linked to a suspect if they voluntarily provided DNA, or if police had a name to compare it to. Investigators also questioned staff at the restaurant and cinema where the couple had spent the evening. But nothing unusual came from those interviews. No drugs, criminal ties, or financial motives were identified, and the couple's valuables were left untouched. Forensic analysis concluded that the weapons used were likely an AR-15 style rifle and a 9mm Ruger pistol. Despite interviewing over 100 people and collecting DNA samples from dozens, the investigation stalled. For over a year, the case remained cold. Then, in the fall of 1996, a new lead investigator stepped in, Agent Randy Upton of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Rather than focusing solely on the killer's identity, Randy pursued a different strategy, tracking the weapons used in the crime. He visited the largest gun store in Macon and requested a customer list of anyone who had purchased an AR-15 style rifle between 1985 and 1995. From that, he compiled a list of 108 names. Agent Upton began methodically calling individuals on the list, asking for permission to inspect their rifles and collect DNA samples to compare with the evidence from the scene. Most were cooperative, and as testing progressed, the list began to shrink. Then came November 27, 1996. Randy contacted Andrew Allen Cook, a 22-year-old who appeared on the list. When asked about the rifle, Andrew claimed he had sold it back in April 1994. Nearly a year before the murders, but store records contradicted that story. Andrew had actually purchased the rifle in August 1994, just 5 months before the murders. Randy's suspicions were piqued. When asked for a DNA sample, Andrew hesitated, saying he needed to speak to his father, then abruptly hung up. This evasiveness made Andrew a person of serious interest. Digging deeper, investigators learned that 5 months after the murders, in mid-1995, Andrew had pawned the rifle in question. Furthermore, back in December 1993, someone had purchased a Ruger pistol on his behalf, as Andrew was underage at the time. He sold that pistol in July 1995. Shortly after pawning the rifle, the timing of these disposals, both within 6 months of the crime, was far too suspicious to ignore then. Another clue emerged. Andrew had previously owned a 1987 Honda CRX, which matched the description of the car seen speeding away from the lake the night of the murders. And now, he no longer had that vehicle either. Agent Randy decided to visit the factory where Andrew worked. Though Andrew wasn't there, Randy spoke with one of his coworkers. What the coworker said changed everything. He told Randy about a strange conversation he'd had with Andrew, where they were discussing the worst things they'd ever done. Andrew reportedly admitted to shooting someone with a rifle. When asked why, Andrew chillingly replied, "I wanted to see if I could get away with it." The coworker also noted that Andrew frequently used chewing tobacco, matching the forensic finding from Michelle's body. Another friend later shared that Andrew had said, in late November 1996, that he needed to get out of town because things were getting hot. It was becoming increasingly clear that investigators were on the right path. John Cook was familiar with the case involving Grant and Michelle through news reports, but had no direct involvement in the investigation. He assured Agent Randy that he didn't consider his son, Andrew, a suspect, but promised to track him down and speak with him that same day. Later, John managed to reach Andrew by phone. What followed would turn his world upside down. John asked Andrew if he knew anything about the incident at Juliet Lake. Andrew's response was chilling. "Daddy, I'm not telling you're one of them. You're a cop, hoping for denial. John asked gently, were you the one who did the shooting? After a brief pause, Andrew confirmed his worst fears. Yes. Andrew went on to explain that he had been at Juliet Lake fishing on the night of the shooting. A couple, Grant and Michelle, arrived, and a confrontation ensued. According to Andrew, Grant had threatened him with a pistol, prompting Andrew to respond with deadly force. John urged his son to surrender to authorities, but Andrew refused, saying he'd rather vanish than be arrested. Though shaken, John maintained his composure and, the next day, visited the Monroe County Sheriff's Office to report his son's confession. At that time, no one yet knew that Andrew had already been arrested earlier that morning in a nearby county for illegally hunting deer and turkey. He had initially provided a false name, but authorities quickly identified him. Agent Randy traveled to Jones County to question Andrew, unaware that Andrew had already confessed to his father. When Randy met him at the sheriff's office, Andrew was defiant. It's been 2 years, and you still don't have any evidence. I used to own a Honda, a rifle, and a Ruger. Now you're just trying to frame me. He told the sheriff that if his father could get a lawyer for him, he'd tell them everything. After Andrew was transferred to Monroe County, he was allowed a private visit with his father. When the two embraced, both broke down in tears. Andrew then confessed further. He had not been at the lake to fish that night. He had arrived after. The couple fired multiple shots with his rifle, and then used his pistol to fire more rounds. He dragged Michelle's body from the car to mislead investigators, and even spat on her to complicate DNA analysis and avoid being linked to the scene. Andrew Cook was formally charged with the murders of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Corda. Investigators found more evidence to support his confession. The rifle and pistol used in the shooting were traced back to him, and forensic testing confirmed they were the murder weapons. Furthermore, DNA recovered from Michelle's body matched Andrew's saliva. His trial began in 1998. During proceedings, his father John took the stand to apologize to the victims' families. He acknowledged that no apology could undo the loss and expressed regret for not seeing the darkness that had overtaken his son. On March 19, 1998, Andrew Cook was found guilty and sentenced to death. After exhausting his appeals, his execution was scheduled for February 22, 2013. 3 days before the date, his attorneys filed for clemency, arguing that Andrew was mentally unstable and in need of psychiatric care. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles considered the plea but ultimately denied it. On the day of the execution, Andrew's family visited him to say their final goodbyes. He chose a final meal of steak, baked potatoes, fried shrimp, lemon pie, and soda. As he lay strapped to the gurney, Andrew spoke his last words. "I'm sorry. I won't ask you to forgive me, because I struggled to forgive myself." He thanked his family for standing by him and apologized for the pain he had caused them. "I'm sorry I took so much from you all." At 11:08 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. 14 minutes later, Andrew Cook, aged 38, was pronounced dead. Afterward, Mary Hendrickson, Grant's mother, expressed relief that justice had finally been served. 18 years after the loss of her son, the case of Krista Baker, Alexander Krista Baker, Alexander, was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel, Jones County, Mississippi, to Pastor Winford and Patty Baker. She was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers. When she was 8, the Baker family moved to Abita Springs, Louisiana, where they built a church and became active in ministry. Growing up, Krista was deeply involved in missionary work, often traveling with Christian organizations to serve underprivileged children. She was homeschooled and later pursued a degree in Christian education through the North Tennessee Bible Institute's online program. Her greatest passion was helping others, particularly children, and she hoped to one day start her own family. Still, her faith always came first. She believed in saving herself for marriage and only dated with the intent of finding a lifelong partner. During her time at church, Krista grew close to Cy Alexander, a fellow youth pastor with a heart for missions. The two families were friendly, and Cy had known Krista for several years before asking her father for permission to propose. Pastor Winford Baker gave his blessing, and the courtship began. Krista and Cy strictly followed their church's traditions. They refrained from physical intimacy and even decided to save their first kiss for their wedding day. Krista assisted her parents in church activities, while Cy pursued a career as a paramedic. On March 1, 2008, Krista and Cy married in a joyful ceremony surrounded by family and fellow church members. Krista looked radiant, and their future seemed full of promise. But just 4 months later, tragedy struck. On the morning of June 29, 2008, Cy returned home from an overnight shift at around 6 a.m. to find Krista lying face down on the floor near the front door. She was dead. He immediately called the police. There were no signs of a struggle, but Krista had been shot in the back of the head at close range. Burn marks on her skin indicated the gun had been fired execution style. A 9mm shell casing was found next to her body. Initially, investigators suspected a robbery gone wrong. It appeared someone may have broken into the house, expecting it to be empty, and killed Krista to eliminate a witness. Inside, the house had been thoroughly searched. Drawers were open. A jewelry box was found on the bed. The gun cabinet had been forced open, and Krista's purse on the kitchen table had clearly been rifled through. Police began interviewing people close to Krista, starting with her husband Cy. At first, he was too emotional to speak and needed time to collect himself. When he finally gave his statement, Cy said everything seemed normal the previous evening before he left for work. He had tried calling and texting Krista several times during the night, but received no response. He assumed she was asleep. When he returned in the morning and saw the front door ajar, he stepped inside only to be met with the horrifying scene of his wife's body and a ransacked home. Everywhere was in disarray. Krista lay lifeless on the floor, a single gunshot wound to her head. Cootie Alexander rushed to her side, checked for a pulse, and realized the unthinkable. She was dead. In a panic, he dialed 911. From the beginning, investigators were focused on determining how someone might have entered the house while Cootie was away at work. One theory was that the perpetrator had waited for Krista to be alone before making their move. But another, more chilling possibility soon emerged, that Krista may have known her killer and willingly let them inside. There were no visible signs of struggle on her body or throughout the home. That, paired with the calm condition of the scene, led detectives to believe she hadn't felt threatened until it was too late. Cootie informed police that 2 guns, a rifle and a shotgun, were missing from the home. But what made the tragedy even more devastating was the revelation that Krista had been 17 weeks pregnant. In one horrific moment, Cootie had lost both his wife and their unborn child. Overwhelmed by grief, he was left shattered and unsure of how to carry on. Still, there was something about the scene that didn't sit right with detectives. The house was messy, but not in the way a typical burglary might look. Cabinets and drawers were ajar, yet there was no evidence that anything had been searched or stolen with purpose. It looked staged, as if someone wanted it to appear like a robbery. The jewelry box was open, but the contents were untouched. Krista's purse was also open, yet everything of value was still there. Oddly, despite multiple firearms being in the house, only 2 were taken. Investigators questioned why the perpetrator would leave behind other weapons if theft was the motive. These inconsistencies led them to suspect that the entire scene had been manipulated to mislead them. They now believed that the killer's real intent was to murder Krista and make it look like a break-in gone wrong. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, hoping someone had seen or heard something. That's when they spoke to 69-year-old Mavis Rebel, the Alexanders' neighbor and landlord. She described the couple as quiet, recently married, and active in their fundamental Baptist church. Mavis said Krista rarely left the house without Cootie and remembered seeing them last on Saturday afternoon. She noted that Cootie had been collecting dead turtles from the pond in their backyard, which he had shot earlier. This detail caught investigators' attention. Cootie had claimed only a rifle and shotgun were missing from the house, yet it was clear he had used a handgun recently. When police searched the property again, they found several 9mm shell casings near the pond casings that matched the one found next to Krista's body. The casings were sent to the state crime lab, and the results were conclusive. The same gun Cootie used to shoot the turtles had killed Krista. Detectives brought Cootie back in for questioning. He firmly denied any involvement in his wife's death, offering a tight alibi. He claimed to have left for work around 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 28, 2008, and returned the next morning around 6 a.m. His co-workers backed up this story. He had indeed been at work all night when pressed about the missing gun. Cootie said he had sold it the day before the murder to a man named Steve, a white male in his mid-30s who drove an old Toyota pickup. The supposed buyer paid $500 in cash, making it difficult to trace. But Krista's parents weren't convinced. Her father, Winford Baker, told detectives that Cootie's reaction to Krista's death was disturbingly flat. They noted that his emotionally detached behavior had started months before the wedding. Financial struggles had weighed heavily on the couple, and the pregnancy had only added more pressure. Krista's parents also suspected infidelity. Cootie had grown close to a female co-worker, who even attended the wedding, just weeks before her death. Krista had confided in friends that she believed Cootie was cheating. As investigators continued digging, the cracks in Cootie's story widened. His timeline began to shift. He failed to mention Steve during earlier interviews. On the night of Krista's murder, Cootie also hadn't tried calling anyone to check on her Ivan, though she was home alone and unresponsive to his calls. Eventually, detectives confronted Cootie with the inconsistencies. Undermounting pressure. His version of events changed completely. Cootie claimed he had been asleep on the couch before his night shift, and that Krista had woken him up late. He said he wasn't angry, but while preparing for work, he had picked up his gun, supposedly to show to a coworker interested in buying it. He admitted to fooling around with the weapon, pointing it at objects and pulling the trigger without a bullet firing. Then, chillingly, he said he walked up behind Krista, pointed the gun at her head, and pulled the trigger again. This time, it fired. He claimed it was an accident. In a panic, he said, he staged the house to look like it had been burglarized. He gathered a few items, some weapons, a DVD player, and left the front door open, hoping someone would notice and find Krista after he left for work. On the drive, he threw the pistol, Krista's jewelry, and other items out of the car window. By the time he arrived at work, the only stolen items left in the car were a DVD player and a Sony radio. He gave the DVD player to a coworker. Cy Alexander had been having an affair with his colleague, Allison Sharp. The two openly displayed affection, even kissing and holding hands, before and after Cy's wedding to his wife, Krista. While Krista attended a church camp, Alexander took Sharp to a Baton Rouge hotel for a romantic evening that included wine, fine china, and a jacuzzi, sweetest despite his reported financial struggles. At the time, both he and Krista were unemployed, living off a mere $1 per hour salary, while he tried unsuccessfully to obtain professional certification. Their washing machine had recently broken, yet Alexander somehow managed to fund a luxurious night away with his mistress. Later, police would uncover a far more disturbing truth. Alexander had claimed Krista's death was an accident, but investigators quickly found inconsistencies in his story. Detectives suspected foul play and grew increasingly suspicious of Cy's behavior, though direct evidence was difficult to secure. Krista's family, devastated by her sudden death, chose forgiveness over bitterness. Her father, Winford Baker, remembered her as a sweet, loving woman who had completed 17 mission trips in her lifetime. Despite his pain, he forgave Sai, even before learning the full truth. We hugged and cried together. He recalled of their last conversation before Sai's arrest. She's with the Lord in heaven now, and at peace. The trial began on August 2, 2009. Prosecutors argued that Sai's actions after Krista's death were highly suspicious, especially the 12-hour delay before calling 911, during which he staged a fake robbery. They also questioned how an experienced gun owner, trained by his father, could accidentally shoot his pregnant wife, Sai Alexander, then 24, was ultimately charged with second-degree murder. He initially went to trial, but suddenly changed his plea to guilty, ending jury deliberations. The plea deal had been supported by Krista's family. In August 2009, he was sentenced to 55 years in prison. The tragic death of Sam Abraham in October 2015. 34-year-old Sam Abraham traveled from Melbourne, Australia, to visit his parents in the Indian state of Kerala. He lived in Epping, a suburb of Melbourne, with his wife Sophia and their 7-year-old son. The family had previously lived in Oman before settling in what was often called the world's most livable city. Both Sam and Sophia were employed, and their life in Australia seemed happy and stable. However, during his visit to India, Sam made unsettling comments to his family. He told his father he felt like he wouldn't live much longer and might return to India in a coffin, though his relatives found the remarks odd. They dismissed them as jokes. Sam's return flight to Australia was scheduled for October 11th. Just 4 days later, on the morning of October 15th, his father received a devastating phone call from Sophia. Through sobs, she informed him that Sam had died suddenly of a heart attack. Sophia handled the arrangements alone and flew Sam's body back to India on October 18th, accompanied by her son and her sister Sonia. Grief engulfed the family, especially Sam's father, who couldn't ignore how eerily his son's prediction had come true. The funeral was held, and Sam was laid to rest in Kerala. Despite her sorrow, Sophia returned to Australia on October 23rd to avoid losing her job. Back in Melbourne, Sophia remained in regular contact with Sam's family, calling them every Saturday without fail. But in late July or early August of 2016, the weekly calls stopped. Concerned, Sam's family reached out to acquaintances in Australia and what they discovered left them stunned. Sophia had been arrested by Victoria police and was in custody. She was charged with the murder of her husband, Sam Abraham. Alongside her, another man's name surfaced, Aaron Kamalasanen, a person the Abraham family had never heard of before. Investigators revealed that both Sophia and Arun had confessed to the crime. The police presented damning evidence, prompting their admission. What followed was a shocking story that tied the countries India and Australia into a dark and calculated murder plot. Sophia's confession would soon unravel the disturbing details of how and why Sam Abraham was murdered. In the vast state of Kerala lies the quiet village of Kavalam, where Sam, Abraham, and Sophia grew up just a few houses apart. Their lives had been intertwined from childhood. They went to the same school, sat in the same classrooms, and even sang together in the church choir. Their bond deepened over the years, especially during college, where they fell in love and began a relationship typical of young students in love. But unknown to Sam, Sophia had also developed feelings for another man, Arun Kamalasan. She kept both relationships a secret, never telling Arun about Sam, nor Sam about Arun in the end. Sophia chose to marry Sam. When Sam informed his family of his desire to marry Sophia, he was stunned by their response. Despite Sophia's respectable family background, her father was a retired defense officer. Sam's father initially opposed the union for reasons he never fully disclosed. The situation escalated when Sophia threatened to take her own life if she couldn't marry Sam. Faced with the seriousness of her threat, Sam's family relented, and the couple married in 2008 in a joyful ceremony. A year later, Sam secured a job with a money exchange company in Oman, and the couple relocated. When Sophia became pregnant, she returned to India to be closer to her family and gave birth to their son there. During her stay in India, Sophia remained in close contact with her sister, who encouraged her to move to Australia, promising better career prospects. With her master's degree in electronics, Sophia soon landed a job in Melbourne and moved there in early 2012 with her young son. Sam joined them a year later, in 2013, transferring through his company. At first glance, life in Melbourne appeared to be going well. Sam and Sophia both had stable jobs. Their son was growing up happily, and the family seemed settled. But beneath the surface, a dangerous secret had taken root. Before Sophia ever moved to Australia, Arun had already migrated there. He was working as an instrumentation engineer, married, and had a child of his own. Yet, despite both being married, Sophia and Arun rekindled their relationship in secret, communicating through messaging apps and phone calls. One of the main reasons Sophia chose Australia was because Arun was already living there. When Sam joined the family in Melbourne, it became harder for the affair to continue. Even so, Sophia maintained her secret communication with Arun. Eventually, she shared a chilling idea with him. If Sam were to die, the two of them could finally be together. Arun agreed. He began to closely monitor Sam's routine, with Sophia providing details to help him plan an attack. In February 2015, Arun saw his opportunity. Sam was sitting in his car, outside a metro station, when a masked Arun approached him and slashed his throat and cheek with a knife. Miraculously, Sam survived. Fortunately for Arun, police were unable to identify or connect him to the crime. Back home, Sophia informed Arun about Sam's survival, and the pair began plotting a new, more reliable method. After considering several ideas, they decided to use cyanide. On October 14, 2015, Sophia mixed cyanide into a glass of orange juice and gave it to Sam, who drank it unsuspectingly. Later that evening, he lay down in bed but never got up again. After confirming Sam had passed, Sophia messaged Aaron to come over. Aaron arrived and checked Sam's body to be sure, even pouring the remaining juice from the glass into Sam's mouth to eliminate doubt. Once he was satisfied Sam was dead, he left the house. Sophia, shockingly, slept beside her husband's corpse with her son in the same room. The next morning, she began crying loudly, drawing neighbors to the house. Sam was rushed to the hospital, but doctors pronounced him dead on arrival. Sophia, playing the grieving widow, told everyone Sam had died from a heart attack in his sleep. She repeated the story to anyone who asked, saying she had tried to wake him but he never responded. No one suspected foul play. Sophia quickly arranged for Sam's body to be flown back to India. It's believed she wanted to avoid an autopsy in Australia, knowing it would reveal the poison. Doctors accepted her story, and the official cause of death was listed as a heart attack. Within 3 days, Sam's body was returned to Kerala, where his funeral was held. In India, no one doubted Sophia's grief. Her dramatic display at the funeral convinced everyone that she was heartbroken. But everything changed when the toxicology report arrived. The report showed high levels of cyanide in Sam's blood and liver, confirming poisoning as the true cause of death. Nearly 10 months later, on August 12, 2016, Victoria police arrested both Sophia and Arun. During a search of Sophia's house, investigators found a handwritten diary. It was written in Malayalam, so the diary was sent for translation. At trial, police presented a wealth of damning evidence: call logs between Sophia and Arun, chat transcripts, Sophia's diary entries, and most importantly, a recorded confession from Arun. In that recording, he admitted to murdering Sam with poison. According to Melbourne-based media, The diary belonged to both Sophia and Aaron. It contained shared reflections, emotions, and plans, some written by Sophia alone, others by both. The diary, once filled with secrets, ultimately became the document that sealed their fate. One of the entries in Sophia's diary mentioned that Arun had also written about the events that followed. Eventually, the Supreme Court of Victoria delivered its final verdict. Arun Kamalasanan was sentenced to 24 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 21 years. Sophia received a 22-year sentence and would be ineligible for parole for 18 years. During the trial, Sophia broke down in tears in court. At one point, the judge made a notable remark, though the transcript did not record his exact words. Following the sentencing, custody of Sophia and Sam Abraham's young son was granted to Sophia's sister, Sonia. However, Sam's parents contested the arrangement, wanting to raise their grandson themselves. Eventually, the child was placed in the care of Sam's family in India. As for Arun's wife and child, no information has been made public. There's also no evidence that either Sophia's parents or Arun's family were aware of the affair or the murder plot beforehand. With that, the haunting and complex case of Sam Abraham's murder came to a close. The Jessica Bardwell case. Hello friends, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we turn our attention to another deeply disturbing case, that of Jessica Bardwell. A team of FBI agents and local detectives arrived at a remote ranch in Murrysville, North Texas, one evening and immediately began combing through the surrounding wooded area. Before long, they noticed a sheet of metal covering something unusual, and nearby, an overwhelming stench of decay confirmed their worst suspicions. Despite the unbearable smell, the officers pressed on. Underneath the metal lay the body of a woman, wrapped in a blue bedsheet, covered with a blanket and 2 red gold towels, both soaked with blood. A mound of trash and dirt served as a crude, shallow grave. It was clear the killer had little experience. Attempts to conceal the body only made it more conspicuous. The body had been exposed to the sweltering Texas sun for over a week and was in an advanced state of decomposition. It took forensic experts 7 full days to confirm the victim's identity using dental records. The remains belonged to 27-year-old Jessica Bardwell, though the exact cause of death couldn't be determined. Due to decomposition, investigators were certain it was a homicide. A major break in the case came from an anonymous informant, whose tip had led authorities to the ranch, though their identity was never made public. Jessica had last lived with her boyfriend, Jason Lowe, in Richardson, Texas. Her sudden disappearance alarmed her father, Gary Bardwell, who was living in Mississippi. He and Jessica had always shared a remarkably close bond, and when she stopped calling, he sensed something was terribly wrong. Let's rewind. Jessica was born on September 10, 1988, in Pascagoula, Mississippi. 2 parents, Gary and Carla Bardwell. She grew up alongside her older brother Brandon, who was fiercely protective of his younger sister. Their grandmother Kitty often visited, filling their childhood with stories, games, and unconditional love. Jessica was kind-hearted, quirky, and creative. She dreamed of opening her own salon and working in the beauty industry. When her parents divorced, she chose to live with her father, Gary, a firefighter. He later remarried a woman named Gina, who became a loving stepmother to Jessica. As Jessica matured, she moved to Orange Beach, Alabama, working as a waitress at a local restaurant called Cobalt. There, she maintained a strong relationship with her father, who visited often, taking her boating and fishing. Her manager, Kimberly, admired the deep connection between them. It was at Cobalt that Jessica met Terry, and the two began dating. But soon, she left him for Jason Lowe, Terry's friend. This new relationship quickly changed her life. Jason promised to help her build her dreams. He moved to Dallas for a job, and Jessica followed him without telling her father in Dallas. Jessica began hunting for salon locations and planning a future with Jason. They even discussed marriage and buying a home. But her communication with Gary grew increasingly strained. she stopped answering his calls, and Gary was alarmed to learn that Jason had started controlling all access to Jessica. Still, months later, Jessica reached out, and she and Jason visited Gary in Mississippi. Gary instantly disliked Jason and pleaded with Jessica not to go back to Texas. But she assured him she was happy and determined to build her future. Gary's unease remained. After their visit, he even wrote a song called Tacona Father's Lament for his daughter. Tragically, his worst fears would soon come true. Jessica eventually vanished completely. She didn't call on Mother's Day, May 8th, which shocked the entire family. She had never missed the occasion before. Alarmed, Gary called Jason, who casually claimed Jessica had left without saying where she was going, citing their open relationship. Gary didn't believe a word. He knew Jason had total control over Jessica's life. The next day, he jumped in his truck and drove straight to Texas. Before arriving, he messaged Jason with a warning: "Jessica better be home when I get there." When Gary reached the apartment, Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her belongings were missing, and Jason acted as if he had no idea where she had gone. Later, Jessica's manager Kimberly would reveal the dark truth. Jason was abusive. He spent their money on drugs and gambling, and his promises about supporting Jessica's dreams had vanished. In private, he was aggressive, controlling, and verbally cruel. Detective Harrenhall of the Richardson Police Department took over the case. He, too, was a father of daughters and was determined to find Jessica. Police questioned Jason multiple times and searched the apartment, but found no trace of Jessica. Jason claimed the last time he saw her was May 8th, when she allegedly left to visit her parents. But investigators soon discovered Jessica had sold her car 3 weeks earlier, and Jason had been there during the transaction. This detail unraveled his story. Suspicious, police returned to the property. On May 12th, they searched Jason's garage and discovered cocaine in the kitchen, along with an unknown powder in the garage. Jason's car, a muddy Audi, with a detached bumper of decomposition. They opened the trunk and found blood. It was clear Jessica Bardwell hadn't left. She had been murdered. While authorities were still searching for Jessica, Jason struggled to explain the blood found in his car or the cocaine discovered in his home. Given the mounting suspicions, the case was reclassified as a homicide to prevent him from fleeing. Even though Jessica's body had not yet been recovered, police moved forward with homicide charges. The search for Jessica continued until her remains were eventually discovered. The autopsy revealed that she had been discarded in a brutal and disrespectful manner. A year later, Jason claimed Jessica's death was an accident and appealed to the jury for understanding. The prosecution, however, faced challenges in building a strong case, and the defense conducted a mock trial that led to a not guilty verdict. It wasn't until Jason disclosed the location of Jessica's body that a plea deal was struck, resulting in a reduced prison sentence. Her family was finally able to give Jessica a proper burial. Her father, Gary, was overwhelmed with grief and rage. In a desperate act of emotional release, he printed out Jason's photo, placed it on a tree stump, and struck it with a 12-pound sledgehammer. Despite this, Gary struggled deeply with guilt, particularly over not convincing Jessica to stay away from her controlling boyfriend. He had hoped she would leave Jason for good, especially after a recent argument, but she had returned to him the very next day. That decision haunted Gary, especially after their last conversation, in which Jessica admitted he had been right about Jason. When the case went to trial in Texas, prosecutor Cynthia Walker described Jason as a volatile and complex individual, with a long history of drug abuse and violent behavior. His former girlfriends took the stand, testifying to his pattern of manipulation, jealousy, and emotional isolation. Each woman recounted how difficult it had been to escape his grip, requiring meticulous planning and fear for their safety. Jason tried to present himself in a different light. He spoke about his early addiction, beginning at age 13, and described how Despite his struggles, he had earned multiple degrees and landed a job with a global company. He claimed that he genuinely loved Jessica and had dreamed of building a family with her, but the prosecution painted a very different picture. Evidence showed Jessica likely died between May 1st and May 3rd, shortly after a heated argument with her neighbors, the Jordans, which marked the last time she was seen alive. Jason moved her body into the garage, then placed it in the trunk of his Audi, where it remained for several days. Forensic tests later confirmed the blood in the vehicle was Jessica's. He eventually transported her remains to a remote farm and dumped her body in the woods, wrapped in a sheet from her own bedding set, a matching set still found in his home, even after Jessica's death. Jason continued meeting and messaging other women, exchanging flirtatious texts and explicit photos. He claimed he was trying to numb his grief and guilt through drug use and casual encounters. But detectives cleverly uncovered his involvement. They enlisted Tommy Jordan, someone Jason trusted, to secretly record a conversation with him. During that exchange, Jason finally confessed, describing his actions as a terrible mistake. Though he stopped short of admitting murder, his statements were enough to be considered a confession. Under a plea deal, Jason revealed the location of Jessica's body and later shared his version of events. According to him, the two had taken libido-enhancing pills and became intimate in the shower. He claimed he slipped, causing Jessica to fall and hit her head. She later said she felt hot and dizzy, but refused medical help. The next morning, Jason said he found her lifeless in his arms, afraid of being blamed. He decided not to contact the police, and instead hid her body, first in his car, then at the farm, dumping her carelessly among trash. However, medical examiners determined that Jessica's injuries were far too severe to have resulted from a simple fall. The autopsy pointed to signs of physical abuse, undermining Jason's version of events. His story was deemed a fabrication. After 6 hours of jury deliberation, Jason Lowe was found guilty. Judge Scott Becker sentenced him to 50 years in prison, a reduced sentence due to the plea agreement. He won't be eligible for parole until at least 24/1 at sentencing. Jessica's father, Gary, expressed relief that justice had finally been served, though he was disturbed by Jason's complete lack of remorse. Two of Jason's ex-girlfriends, including Chrissy Chambers, attended the hearing. Chrissy had once warned Jessica to leave Jason if she could, a warning that, tragically, came too late. Jessica had grown up with a strong, positive male role model in her father and never truly understood how manipulative and dangerous some men could be. Her story is a heartbreaking reminder for women to prioritize their safety and independence before it's too late. Not just for themselves, but for the ones who love them most. To manage his romantic entanglements, Marcel assigned specific days for each woman. Fridays were reserved for Klotman, while Saturdays were for Van Doren. This arrangement worked for a while, until an unexpected twist unraveled it all. On the evening of Friday, November 10th, 2006, Klotman followed the usual routine and visited Marcel's apartment. Unbeknownst to her, Van Doren had decided to surprise Marcel by arriving unannounced that same night. Klotman and Marcel were out having dinner, but upon their return, they found Van Doren waiting at the door. What exactly was said between the three is unknown, but one thing was certain. That night, Klotman did not sleep beside Marcel. Instead, she was relegated to a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Van Doren spent the night with Marcel in his bedroom. From the floor, Klotman noticed Van Doren's parachuting gear, her backpack and equipment lying nearby. The sight cut deep, feeling betrayed, deceived, and replaced by someone she considered a friend. Klotman's emotions spiraled, leading her to a decision that would soon have fatal consequences. A week later, on November 18, 2006, 12 members of their skydiving club, including Van Doren, Klotman, Marcel Van, and another jumper named Tom, boarded a plane for a formation jump over Flanders. The plan was for the four to exit the aircraft at 13,000 feet. link up mid-air in a circle formation, then break off and deploy their parachutes. As scheduled, Marcel and Tom jumped first. Klotman followed, though it appeared she delayed her jump, slightly possibly on purpose. During the descent, Klotman never managed to catch up to the formation. At around 9,000 feet, the group separated to prepare for their individual landings. But something went terribly wrong. Van Doren tried to deploy her parachute. It didn't open, remaining calm at first. She began emergency procedures, something she'd done before during a previous malfunction, but this time, her reserve chute also failed to deploy. Now plummeting toward the ground at nearly 200 kilometers per hour, Van Doren had fewer than 20 seconds to save herself. Despite tugging desperately at both cords, primary and reserve, there was no response. Above her, Marcel noticed that Van Doren's parachute still hadn't deployed. From 800 meters up, he could do nothing but watch in helpless horror at the same time. In the nearby town of Opglabik, a woman doing laundry in her garden heard a loud thud. She glanced upward and saw a parachutist descending rapidly, living near the skydiving center. She was accustomed to seeing jumpers land in the area, but what she found next was harrowing. A body lay motionless among her shrubs, parachute tangled in the bushes. She called for her husband, and together they contacted emergency services. The victim was Van Doren. She showed no signs of life. Meanwhile, Marcel landed safely and frantically ran through the streets, searching for Van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the crash site. As he rushed toward her, responders had to hold him back. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but to no avail. Van Doren was gone. Marcel insisted that her parachute be preserved for examination, convinced that both the main and reserve chutes failing simultaneously was far from normal. He then phoned Van Doren's husband, Jan, to deliver the devastating news. Jan rushed to the scene, while Klotman and Tom returned to the parachute club to inform others of the tragedy. Klotman was reportedly overwhelmed and broke down crying. When Jan arrived at the club to collect his wife's belongings, Klotman offered to retrieve them. Jan noticed her acting strangely, standing still with an odd smile. As they headed toward the changing room, Klotman suddenly shut the door, locking Jan out. He later recalled that she took an unusually long time inside before emerging with Van Doren's things. Back at the crash site, police recovered Van Doren's parachute and helmet, the latter containing a camera that had recorded her final jump. An autopsy revealed no drugs or alcohol in her system. Her death was classified as either murder or suicide, with multiple internal injuries and fractures from the impact. Confirming that she died on contact, Van Doren's family immediately suspected foul play, especially considering her experience as a skydiver and the mysterious dual-chute failure. Police quietly advised the skydiving club members not to attend her funeral advice. Some, including Marcel and Klotman, ignored. Jan was particularly heartbroken to learn of his wife's affair, especially since many at the club had known and kept it from him. To make matters worse, Van Doren had falsely told her friends she was separated from her husband. Her funeral took place just one day before their daughter, Carol's 15th birthday. During the service, Carol delivered a moving tribute to her mother, expressing how the family had often begged her to stop skydiving, wishing she'd chosen to stay with them instead. Following the funeral, authorities launched a deeper investigation. A parachute specialist was brought in to examine Van Doren's gear. It didn't take long to uncover something suspicious. The pilot chute, a critical component that triggers the main and reserve parachutes, was missing. Not only that, but the cord connecting to the pilot chute had been cut, and a strap tied to the emergency chute showed signs of tampering. Video footage from Van Doren's helmet revealed something odd, a red piece of fabric floating in front of her face during the fall, which did not belong to her equipment. Investigators asked residents near the drop zone to search for this fabric, which might hold DNA evidence, but it was never found. Then, the Monday after Van Doren's death, a surprising development occurred. Klotman claimed to have found the missing pilot chute hanging from a tree on her drive from Marcel's apartment. Rather than informing police, she told Marcel first. He then contacted authorities, who met Klotman at the location. Police noted her visibly emotional and distressed state. Her story, that she'd taken a different route home due to a slow tractor and happened to glance upward, raised red flags. At that time, the fact that the pilot chute was missing had not been made public, known only to police and select experts. Now, the investigation turned toward three main suspects: Van Doren's husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend, Klotman. Authorities soon began searching Marcel's residence as they dug deeper into the mystery surrounding Els Van Doren's tragic fall, a descent not of chance, but of sabotage. Authorities later cleared both Marcel Van Doren and his husband, Jan, as suspects in the investigation. As part of their inquiry, police turned their attention to Els Klotman's home, where they seized her phone, laptop, and a personal diary she had been keeping at the advice of her psychiatrist. Klotman was soon called in for questioning. Investigators hoped to gain more insight into her relationship with Marcel Van Doren and the circumstances surrounding the suspicious death of Els Van Doren. Throughout the interrogation, Klotman adamantly denied any involvement in sabotaging Van Doren's parachute. Instead, she deflected suspicion toward others, suggesting that Marcel could have tampered with the equipment since he kept Van Doren's gear during her weekend visits, or even pointing to Van Doren's husband Jan, claiming she stored her own equipment with him during the week. After the initial questioning, Klotman was released. However, she failed to appear for a scheduled follow-up interview on December 20th, 2006. That same morning, her mother found her unconscious. Klotman had attempted suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills and antidepressants. She was rushed to the hospital and survived after emergency treatment. In letters left behind, Klotman wrote about the deep grief she felt over the loss of her close friend and the unbearable pressure of being a murder suspect. Following her recovery, she spent 15 days in a psychiatric facility under close supervision. She had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression, and this was not her first suicide attempt. Marcel, who had distanced himself from Klotman, believed her overdose was more of a manipulative act than a genuine suicide attempt, timed, he thought, to coincide with her mother's return home. He suspected Klotman was trying to deflect suspicion as police began uncovering more of her contradictions. On January 11, 2007, after receiving psychiatric care, Klotman was arrested on suspicion of murdering Els Van Doren. During her first court appearance on January 19th, the judge ordered that she remain in custody as the investigation continued. Although asked to take a polygraph test, Klotman refused, and the test was never conducted. Forensic examination of Van Doren's parachute revealed chilling details. The cords had been deliberately cut with scissors, likely by someone using their right hand. By March 2007, Klotman had spent 3 months in prison and remained under intense questioning. While she never confessed to the murder, she did admit to sending an anonymous letter to Van Doren, criticizing her for neglecting her family due to frequent skydiving. Van Doren's partner Jan had discovered the letter but initially dismissed it as little more than a complaint. However, investigators later determined that Klotman had intended the letter as a veiled threat warning Van Doren to stay away from Marcel. Klotman also admitted to making anonymous phone calls to Marcel, deliberately choosing times when she knew he was with Van Doren to unnerve and intimidate them both. Analysis of her automatic activation device revealed that she had jumped later than the rest of the group during the fatal skydive and opened her parachute earlier, potentially giving her a clear view of what happened to Van Doren. Despite the serious charges, Klotman was granted bail in September 2008 and returned to her job working at a school. The murder trial began 2 years later. On September 24, 2010, prosecutors were confident in their case, arguing that Klotman had a powerful motive: jealousy. She had discovered that her romantic partner, Marcel, was having a relationship with her close friend Van Doren. During questioning, Klotman admitted she always felt like she came second to Van Doren in Marcel's eyes. The prosecution argued that this emotional torment fueled her desire to eliminate her romantic rival. They claimed Klotman's jealousy drove her to sabotage Van Doren's parachute, knowing it would lead to a fatal fall. In her defense, Klotman's lawyer insisted that the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and unproven theories. On the stand, Klotman claimed she never envisioned a future with Marcel and described their intimacy as a product of her low self-esteem. She even attempted to shift suspicion toward Van Doren's daughter, Carol, suggesting she may have had resentment over her mother's frequent absences, but the jury was unconvinced. On October 20th, 2010, Els Klotman was found guilty of murdering her friend, Els Van Doren, and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Throughout the trial, Klotman maintained her innocence and was kept under strict observation to prevent further self-harm. She later appealed her conviction, arguing that police had questioned her without a lawyer present, but in May 2011, her appeal was denied. After serving 12.5 years behind bars, Klotman was granted conditional release in June 2022, following a third appeal. Today, she is a free woman. We extend our deepest condolences to the family of Els Van Doren, who endured unimaginable grief and betrayal. The loss of such a vibrant life, taken in an act of jealousy and revenge, is a chilling reminder of how far obsession can go. Sunny was visibly shaken and trembling when she asked her cousin Pamela to take her home before Leth arrived. Once there, she locked and chained the door. But an hour later, Leth showed up, yelling and banging furiously. Pamela threatened to call the police, and only then did Leth leave. After calming down, Sunny stayed home alone. But later that evening, Pamela received a call Sunny was in the hospital. Somehow, Leth had gotten into the house. When Sunny attempted to end the relationship, he violently retaliated. He tore her clothes, beat her on the head, face, chest, arms, and thighs, leaving her covered in bruises. One tooth was loosened. She even lost consciousness after being choked until she passed out. Not long after, Sunny discovered Leth Moody's birth control pills in her apartment, another betrayal, and once again, he assaulted her. By late 2008. Sunny was 27 and working at a Christian academy. She was dependable and punctual, so when she requested time off, it was typically for serious reasons. One day, she called in, explaining that she couldn't come to work because her face was badly bruised and she didn't want the children to see her that way. The director allowed her to wear sunglasses at work, and Sunny confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to run her off the road. But Leth Moody's violence wasn't limited to Sunny and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm despite being a convicted felon and prohibited from possessing one. He had already served 2 years for theft and 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. On October 6, 2008, Sunny's situation reached a breaking point after failing to show up at the academy. She sent a chilling text to her boss at 5 p.m. It read that Leth was holding her hostage in her home and had been beating her all day. She included her address. Her boss called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived. The front door was locked and no one responded. Firefighters were called to breach the door. Once inside, officers saw Leth escaping through an open window at the back of the apartment. Inside, Sunny stood in the hallway, visibly distraught and unable to speak. Her 4 children were with her. Her face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sunny explained that Leth had refused to let her or the children answer the door or go near the windows. He had even injured one of the children by grabbing him and then prevented Sunny from seeking medical care. She detailed how Leth choked her with a baby blanket until she lost consciousness. When police arrived, he had threatened to suffocate. her again, and vowed to kill her next time. Despite a search, Leth was not found. 3 days later, Sunny filed for a restraining order, fearing for her life. But when she failed to appear at the hearing on October 23rd, the order was never granted. 6 months passed. On March 10, 2009, Sunny and Leth were still in contact. That day, Leth was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead started an argument, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The confrontation escalated. He slapped her, pulled her hair, and yelled death threats. Sunny broke free and ran from the apartment with Leth chasing behind. Though he didn't catch her, he grabbed their infant child and drove off at high speed. A police patrol arrived as he fled, but Leth managed to escape. By early 2010, Sunny was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her 5th child was just 9 weeks old and in fragile health, keeping her mostly at home. That January, Sunny and her children moved into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. On the very day they moved in, staff had to intervene due to loud arguments, disturbing other guests. The pattern continued. On January 22nd, a security guard witnessed Leth pull into the motel in Sunny's car, clearly agitated. He yelled up at Sunny, who stood on a second-floor balcony with their children. During the argument, he hurled a bag of groceries at her. The guard warned him to lower his voice and stop throwing things, advising them to continue the argument. Inside, Leth responded by telling the guard to mind his own business, locked the car, and walked away. The guard followed Leth to a 3rd-floor room, not registered to anyone. When asked for his keys, Leth surprisingly produced keys to 3 different rooms, none of which were officially rented in his name. The next day, Leth, Sunny, and the children moved into room 222. That night, the night manager asked Leth to leave, and, though he did, he returned again. These confrontations continued for days. Eventually, the same security guard who had previously warned them demanded Leth leave the property for good. That evening, Leth drove away. On January 26th, Sunny confided in Pamela that she was staying at a motel and hinted that something serious was going on. She promised to reach out if she or Leth ever left the hotel. The next day, January 27th, began routinely. Sunny dropped her children at daycare and took her eldest to school. Around 11 a.m., the motel's housekeeping manager knocked on her door to inform her they needed to pay or leave. Sunny didn't answer. He returned multiple times that day. Around 2:30 p.m., Leth finally opened the door and claimed his mother would soon return with the money. But later, when hotel security checked room 222, it was empty. Children's clothes, bags and belongings were scattered everywhere. Oddly, one bed was perfectly made in unsettling contrast to the disarray in the room. Later that day, Sunny failed to pick up her eldest daughter from school. Concerned, the school called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother. Christine tried calling Sunny, but there was no answer. She then discovered the younger children were still at daycare. Alarmed, she and her husband retrieved the kids and contacted the police that night. A missing persons report was filed at 10:30 p.m. on January 28th. The motel housekeeping manager re-entered room 222. It was now officially vacant. He collected the personal items left behind and took them, including a large trash bag, to storage. The room was cleaned and prepared for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent checked into room 222, but upon entering, they noticed a strong foul odor. They tried masking it with incense, but failed. During their inspection, they found scented tissues stuffed into ceiling vents and tile cracks of evidence. The previous tenants had attempted to conceal the smell. The stench worsened when someone sat on the bed. That same day, Memphis Police's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sunny's whereabouts. Room 222 was the last place she was seen, but officers did not search the room. Leth was soon found. On February 2nd, around 7 p.m., Lev was arrested while sitting in Sunny's car, which was parked at a shopping center. The vehicle had been reported stolen, and Lev was taken into custody and held for 48 hours. During questioning, he claimed the last time he saw Sunny was on January 26th, according to Lev. They met early that morning around 7 a.m. in a hotel parking lot, went to a room where they were intimate, and later returned. Outside, he said Sunny willingly gave him her car keys, explaining that she planned to buy a new vehicle using her social benefits and a student loan. However, investigators uncovered inconsistencies in his story. They learned that Lev had been staying at a different hotel entirely, making it unlikely he had been sleeping in the caress, especially given the cold, snowy weather at the time. On February 3rd, police discovered Sunny's debit card and multiple recent purchase receipts inside her vehicle. That same day, officers examined a set of clothing Lev had kept at the hotel, hoping to find DNA or forensic evidence. Nothing significant turned up. With no physical evidence tying Lev to Sunny's disappearance, police were forced to release him. Meanwhile, Sunny's cousin and mother visited the hotel to collect her belongings. Painful and surreal experience, her cousin recalled, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread but found nothing at the time to support her fears. On February 4th, police visited the home of Lev's cousin, where they located a DVD player and Sunny's wallet, both of which had been taken from the hotel room Sunny had last stayed in. Lev had given the items to his cousin, claiming on January 24th that he simply wanted to borrow the DVD player to watch a movie. That day, the cousin also saw Lev driving a red car. Later, when asked why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th as expected, Lev avoided answering. When the conversation turned to Sunny, he abruptly left, leaving behind the DVD player and wallet in a bag. That same day, James and Rhonda Sargent, who had rented room 222 at the hotel, complained about a persistent foul odor. Since no other rooms were available, they decided to move to a different hotel altogether. Even after the room was cleaned and the carpet shampooed in early February, new guests in room 222 continued to complain about the awful smell. It improved briefly, but never went away. Sunny's children were devastated by her unexplained disappearance. The family held on to hope that she might return safely. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel where Sunny was last seen. By that point, room 222 had been cleaned and occupied at least 3 times. Detectives did not enter the room, but asked staff if they had noticed anything unusual. No one reported anything of note. On February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel. Over the course of their stay, they changed rooms 3 times, including spending one night again in room 222. They again reported the strong, foul odor. In March, hotel management ordered a deep cleaning of room 222, including the carpet, bedding, bathroom, and curtains. Strangely, the smell didn't go away, got worse. Finally, the hotel manager discussed the lingering odor with a security guard. During their conversation, the guard remembered Sunny's disappearance and suggested they check room 222 for signs of blood or cleaning products. Just 10 minutes later, the manager returned, visibly shaken, and asked the guard to come with him. Inside the room, the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the frame. The base of the bed had a built-in enclosure, which made it appear unusable for storage. But when they lifted the box spring, they discovered a hollow compartment beneath large enough to hide something. As they peered into the dark space, they were horrified to find the decomposing body of a woman. Police were immediately called to the scene. The bed frame showed multiple marks, including 2 areas where the wood near the headboard had been broken. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the victim's legs. She was clothed only from the waist up, wearing a shirt but no pants or undergarments. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death: strangulation using a coaxial cable. The cable had been looped around the woman's neck, passed under one arm around the chest, and tied off behind her back. Forensic experts stated it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous force to kill her. DNA testing confirmed the body was Sonny's. Male genetic material was also recovered from 5 areas of the coaxial cable. Investigators suspected that the cable used to kill her came from the DVD player Lev had borrowed from his cousins, suggesting the murder had been premeditated. Although Lev was not immediately charged in connection with Sonny's murder, he was soon arrested on a separate charge for unlawful possession of a firearm, a serious offense, given his prior felony conviction. At the time of his arrest, he was considered a person of interest in Sonny's death. He had been the last person seen with her alive, and was found in possession of her car. On March 18th, the police department announced an internal investigation into the case, admitting that the search had taken a critical misstep. Officers had failed to check the room itself, despite numerous complaints about the odor. They acknowledged that the delay had cost valuable time and potentially lost evidence, since the room had been cleaned and rented multiple times since Sonny's death. The discovery, they admitted, was more disturbing than any fiction and underscored the grim reality of domestic violence. Rhonda, who had stayed in room 222 early in the investigation, was outspoken in her criticism of the police. In an interview with the media, she said that if officers had simply asked to enter the room, she and her husband would have cooperated without hesitation. She questioned how trained investigators failed to recognize the unmistakable smell of a decomposing body, something she and her husband had clearly noticed. On March 24th, Sonny was finally laid to rest in a loving, dignified funeral ceremony. Her children were placed in the custody of her sister and brother-in-law, who began the legal process to gain guardianship by April 1st. Though her family was shattered by the loss, Sonny's sister vowed to keep her memory alive. While nothing could bring Sonny back, she promised to raise her children with love and stability, determined to give them the future their mother would have wanted. Sonny relied heavily on social assistance to provide for her family's basic needs: clothing, toys, and most importantly, to keep her family together. A government program regularly reloaded her electronic benefit transfer (EBT) card for groceries. Shortly before she disappeared, her card had been replenished with her tax refund. Police were able to trace the card's activity, which led them to Leaf, who was found in possession of it. Investigators discovered the card had been used on February 1st, 4 days after Sonny went missing at a convenience store she frequented. On the 1st of every month to withdraw cash, officers visited the store and reviewed footage from its 16 surveillance cameras. The video showed a man wearing yellow clothing using Sonny's card at 11:38 a.m. He purchased a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and bought a cigar. After completing the transaction, he returned to a car driven by another individual. By the time Leaf's trial began, in February 2014, 4.5 years after the crime, the Budget Lodge motel, where he and Sonny had stayed, had already shut down. Leaf maintained his innocence. The prosecution, however, painted a grim picture, describing the incident as the tragic result of a volatile relationship. The defense countered by emphasizing the lack of direct evidence, no witnesses and no forensic proof tying Leaf to the crime. One crucial detail highlighted by the defense was a fingerprint found on the bed frame at the crime scene, one that did not belong to Leaf. They argued this could point to another possible suspect. The defense also noted Sonny's past relationships with other men as a potential motive for someone else to harm her. Importantly, they stressed that Leaf had no documented history of domestic violence against Sonny. In fact, she had only returned to stay with him due to a rat infestation at a relative's home. During the trial, footage was played showing Leaf using a prepaid card belonging to Sonny just 4 days after her murder. While the defense interpreted his calm demeanor as a sign of innocence, the prosecution viewed it as indicative of a cold and calculated killer. On February 7, 2014, Leaf was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. 3 days later, on February 10th, he filed an appeal, arguing that the court had erred in considering past alleged domestic abuse and that the evidence presented was insufficient. However, on July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld his conviction, reaffirming the life sentence. Now, let's shift focus to a high-profile disappearance case. Natalee Holloway. 18-year-old Natalee Holloway vanished in May 2005 while vacationing in Aruba picturesque island in the southern Caribbean near Venezuela. Natalee had traveled there with 124 fellow students from Mountain Brook High School and 7 chaperones to celebrate their graduation. They stayed at the Holiday Inn, enjoying the beaches, nightlife, and warm tropical atmosphere during 5 fun-filled days. However, on the day they were scheduled to return home, Natalee was nowhere to be found. Her belongings, passport, and phone were still in her hotel room, yet she had disappeared. Her mother, Elizabeth Twitty, immediately sensed that something was wrong. Natalee was a responsible and communicative girl. Elizabeth and her husband quickly flew to Aruba and launched their own search, frustrated by the local police's dismissive attitude. Authorities told them that such disappearances were often due to missed flights or late-night partying, but Elizabeth knew better. Natalee was last seen leaving Carlos and Charlie's nightclub with 17-year-old Joran Vandersloot, a local who had offered her a drink. He left with her and 2 of his friends in a silver Honda. 4 hours later, Elizabeth again contacted police, this time armed with alarming information. Initially, Vandersloot denied knowing Natalee. Eventually, he admitted to leaving the club with her, driving around, and dropping her near her hotel. His 2 friends, Deepak and Satish Kalpo, confirmed his version of events. Natalee was born on October 21, 1986, in Clinton, Mississippi, to Elizabeth and David Holloway. After their divorce, Natalee and her brother stayed with their mother, though David remained a strong emotional and financial presence. In 2000, Elizabeth remarried George Twitty, and the family relocated to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Natalee thrived there. She was kind, modest, and sociable, with a strong church upbringing. She excelled in academics, dance, and extracurriculars, earning a substantial scholarship for pre-medical studies. Her future looked bright. Elizabeth was adamant that her daughter wouldn't have gotten into a car with someone she didn't trust. Surveillance footage seemed to support her instincts. Natalee appeared to behave unusually after consuming a drink offered by Joran, suggesting she may have been drugged. Carlos and Charlie's staff remembered Natalee fondly, but Joran had a questionable reputation, known for drinking, gambling, and sharing inappropriate videos online. He avoided consequences due to his father's legal influence. Natalee's disappearance triggered a massive search operation. Police, volunteers, divers, and search dogs combed the island. The Aruban government even declared a national holiday to aid the effort, with Marines sweeping the coastline and planes using thermal imaging over 40 kilometers of terrain. Still, there was no sign of Natalee. On June 30th, investigators noted a key contradiction. There was no surveillance footage of Natalee returning to the hotel, contradicting Joran and the Kalpo brothers' account. Questioned again, the younger Kalpo brother changed his story. He claimed they dropped Natalee off at an area without cameras, not near the hotel, and said he saw a figure in black following her. 2 hotel security guards were arrested but later cleared. One guard who shared a cell with the Kalpo brothers reported that one of them admitted they had lied. Natalee was last seen alone on the beach with Joran. Another suspect, local DJ Steve Gregory Crows, was detained on June 17th. A few days later, Joran's father, Paulus Vandersloot, was also arrested but soon released due to lack of evidence. Joran's explanations changed again. This time, he said he had parted ways with Natalee near his house, claiming she left with the Kalpo brothers. His inconsistent stories made investigators increasingly suspicious. On July 4th, the Calpo brothers were released. Joran himself, born August 6, 1987, in the Netherlands, was known to be a good student and skilled athlete. Despite his achievements, he had a strained relationship with his mother and a rebellious streak, gravitating toward risky behaviors like gambling and deceit. Locals grew wary of how leniently Joran was being treated, given his connections. Though suspicions mounted and his stories unraveled, Natalie Holloway's fate remained a haunting mystery for years to come. Despite concerns about his troubling attitude, Jan remained popular among girls and often took advantage of them as authorities continued their investigation into the suspects. The desperate search for Natalie Holloway pressed on. U.S. officials closely monitored the case, offering substantial financial support. The Holloway family, clinging to hope, initially announced a $50,000 reward for information. As time passed with no breakthrough, the reward increased to $1 million. Additionally, they offered $100,000 for the location of her remains, a sum that was eventually raised to $250,000. The announcement of a reward prompted new witnesses to come forward. One claimed to have seen Jan with the Calpo brothers at a local nightclub between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Another claimed to have seen several suspicious men concealing a woman's body at a dump site on the afternoon of May 30th. However, these leads could not be verified and ultimately derailed the investigation. On August 26th, authorities arrested the Calpo brothers and another young man not for direct involvement, but seemingly as an intimidation tactic. On September 3, 2005, all four individuals were released on bail, and shortly thereafter, the court lifted all restrictions, as no substantial evidence was found linking them to the crime. Jan van der Sloot was detained for 3 months. After his release, he attempted to exploit his infamy by appearing on talk shows and giving interviews. In one appearance, he alleged that Natalie had flirted with him and offered to have sex, but he declined because he didn't have a condom. During another appearance, Jan became aggressive and threw a glass at the interviewer, the targeted journalist. Still harboring resentment, collaborated with police to secretly record Jan. A hidden microphone in a friend's car captured Jan's chilling confession. He claimed that after having sex with Natalie on the beach, she began convulsing, lost consciousness, and died. He and a friend then disposed of her body at sea. Despite this admission, Jan later dismissed it as a lie, told to impress his friend, and no charges followed. In 2007, Jan published a book titled The Case of Natalie Holloway, my own account of her disappearance in Aruba, in which he told yet another version of the story and offered an insincere apology to the Holloway family. By this time, the official investigation had largely stalled. In 2008, 2 new witnesses emerged. One claimed to have seen Jan and his father, Paulus, on the beach around 4 a.m. the night Natalie disappeared. The witness described Jan as disheveled and recalled a tense argument between the father and son before they drove away. However, Paulus had an alibi. Another witness, Jan's ex-girlfriend, recalled him once saying he knew how to dispose of a body. Still, these claims held little weight, given Jan's history of dishonesty. The Holloways, frustrated by the lack of progress, hired a private investigator. Alongside Natalie's father, the investigator re-examined the case, uncovering glaring oversights by Aruban authorities. Natalie's classmates and hotel neighbors had never been interviewed. Someone had used her hotel keycard multiple times the night she vanished, and while her phone and toothbrush were left behind, male DNA was discovered on the brush. The investigation revealed gross negligence and bureaucratic failure. In 2010, Paulus van der Sloot died of a heart attack, reportedly brought on by stress and shame over his son's actions. After his father's death, Jan attempted to extort the Holloway family, offering to reveal the truth in exchange for $250,000. The family agreed to an initial payment of $25,000. In a meeting with Them, Jan claimed Natalie had resisted his advances, leading him to push her. She hit her head and lost consciousness, and he buried her body in a building's foundation. However, authorities quickly debunked this version, as the building's foundation had already been poured before Natalie went missing. Jan fled to Peru with the money, but his past finally caught up with him. On June 1st, 2010, the body of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez was discovered in a hotel room in Lima. She had been beaten to death, the cause listed as a fractured neck. Surveillance footage identified Jan as the killer. He had met Stephanie in a casino and taken her to his room. When she discovered his involvement in Natalie Holloway's case on his laptop, she panicked. Enraged, Jan attacked and killed her. Jan was apprehended while trying to flee to Chile. He confessed to Stephanie's murder for days after his arrest. The crime shocked the U.S., occurring exactly 5 years to the day after Natalie disappeared. Elizabeth Twitty, Natalie's mother, expressed her grief, saying justice had come tragically at the cost of another young woman's life. In 2012, Jan was sentenced to 28 years in prison for Stephanie's murder and ordered to pay $775,000 to her family. He was later transferred to Chalapalca prison in 2014. While incarcerated, he married a woman who was visiting another inmate. It was later revealed Jan was exploiting her, showing no genuine remorse for his crimes. Back in the U.S., Natalie's father, David Holloway, filed a petition in 2011 to have his daughter declared legally deceased. Her mother opposed it, hoping Jan would someday confess and stand trial. On January 12, 2012, a judge ruled in favor of the petition. Over a decade later, in June 2023, Jan was extradited to the United States and held at Hoover City Jail in Alabama. On October 18, 2023, he entered a plea agreement, confessing to Natalie's murder. He admitted to bludgeoning her with a cinder block on May 30, 2005, and disposing of her body in the ocean to be consumed by sharks. However, the confession, made as part of a plea deal, could not be used in court. Jan was sentenced to 20 years in U.S. prison. To run concurrently with his sentence in Peru, Natalie Holloway's disappearance remains one of the most infamous unsolved missing persons cases in American history. Though her killer eventually confessed, systemic failures, corruption, and missteps by investigators allowed him to evade justice for years. By February, Skylar Richardson's eating disorder appeared to be under control. She had selected a tightly fitted prom dress and was determined to fit into it. During a family vacation in mid-March, she confidently wore a two-piece bathing suit and seemed healthy. Around that time, her mother Kim encouraged her to begin taking birth control to safeguard her health. In mid-April 2017, Skylar visited her mother's gynecologist to get a prescription for the pills. During the appointment, however, the doctor gave her shocking news. Skylar was around 8 months pregnant. Stunned, Skylar begged the doctor not to tell anyone, not even her mother. Kim noticed her daughter crying, but remained unaware of the real reason, despite being in the final weeks of pregnancy. Skylar attended prom on May 5th with her boyfriend Brandon. Then, just 2 months later, on July 14, 2017, police arrived at the Richardson home. They told Kim and Scott Richardson that they needed to speak to Skylar regarding something she might have witnessed. They assured the parents she wasn't in trouble. Scott agreed to drive his daughter to the police station, unaware of the true reason behind the request. Investigators had received a disturbing call from the gynecologist's office. One of the doctor's patients had given birth to a stillborn infant and buried the baby in the backyard. That patient was Skylar. At the police station, Skylar was read her rights and questioned without her father present. Officers told her that the doctor had reported she had been pregnant as of April 26th and later claimed the baby was stillborn and buried. Skylar then admitted that on May 7th, just 2 days after prom, she had gone into labor alone in her bathroom. She said the baby didn't breathe, had no heartbeat, and appeared lifeless. Panicked, She wrapped the baby in a towel, went into the backyard, dug a shallow grave, and buried the body. She marked the grave with a vase and flower. When police informed Kim and Scott of the real reason for their daughter's detainment, they were devastated. They had no idea she had been pregnant. Skylar told them she had named the baby Annabelle, and said the father was a cousin of a friend she had briefly dated. Crime scene investigators searched the backyard, carefully clearing weeds and debris. Despite the passage of time, they recovered multiple bone fragments, including pieces of the infant's skull. After over 5 hours of questioning, Skylar was allowed to return home, but 6 days later, police contacted her again. The coroner's office had provided new information. They believed the baby's remains showed signs of being burned. Skylar adamantly denied the accusation, insisting she would never harm her child. Yet during a follow-up interrogation, she changed her story, stating she might have tried to cremate the body using a lighter. She also said the baby may have been alive, possibly cried, and that she may have accidentally held her too tightly. Based on this shifting account, detectives arrested Skylar and charged her with reckless homicide. After presenting the case to a grand jury, the charges escalated. Skylar was indicted for aggravated murder, a charge that carried a mandatory life sentence in Ohio. She was also charged with voluntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse at her arraignment. Skylar pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her family posted a $50,000 bond, allowing her to return home. But the media firestorm surrounding the case was immediate and unrelenting. Skylar and her family became the center of intense public scrutiny, and the backlash forced them to retreat into isolation. Even stepping outside became dangerous due to paparazzi and threats. Despite concerns that Skylar's confession may have been false or coerced, prosecutors pressed on. Although the coroner later retracted the claim about burning, the state leaned heavily on Skylar's own words to suggest guilt. Her defense attorneys argued that her statements were unreliable and made under pressure. Skylar's release came with strict conditions. She wore an ankle monitor and remained confined to her home. Her college plans were suspended, and her once promising future hung in limbo. A motion to move the trial to another county was denied, leaving her to face a jury in the same community where the case had made headlines. Throughout the ordeal, Skylar's family stood by her, believing in her innocence. She spent her time quietly, finding solace in her dogs and clinging to hope. In July 2019, prosecutors offered a plea deal. If Skylar pleaded guilty to lesser charges, the aggravated murder charge would be dropped. Her parents were divided, afraid she might be taking a risk, but ultimately, Skylar rejected the deal, choosing to go to trial. Her trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution presented a series of text messages Skylar had sent shortly after giving birth. In one, she told her mother she was excited her belly had gone back to normal. In others, she expressed feeling relieved and happy. Prosecutors used those texts to argue she was glad her baby had died. They claimed she had no intention of keeping the child and had even searched online for ways to terminate the pregnancy. They also alleged that Skylar's mother had warned her that her life would be ruined if she ever became pregnant, creating a powerful fear in Skylar. On the third day of trial, a medical expert for the state testified that the baby's death was a violent homicide. The defense challenged the prosecution's forensic evidence, particularly questioning the medical examiner's conclusions. Although the doctor testified that the baby had suffered skull fractures, she admitted she couldn't determine exactly when those injuries occurred. The defense suggested that her findings may have been influenced by bias and criticized her methodology, noting that she hadn't examined the tissue under a microscope or consulted with an obstetrician. Another expert, a fetal medicine specialist, testified that it was unlikely the baby had been stillborn. He cited Skylar's own admission that she had felt the baby moving inside her prior to the birth. The prosecution's case also included deeply disturbing photographs of the baby's remains. These images were shown in court and had a visible emotional impact on Skylar, though her reaction was oddly subdued. As the images were presented, she stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. This starkly contrasted with her displayed the day before, when the judge entered the courtroom. Skylar's defense team painted a more nuanced picture of her life. They argued that even before the criminal charges, Skylar had been facing significant personal struggles. They accused the prosecution of presenting incomplete and misleading evidence, particularly citing that certain text messages were taken out of context. The defense emphasized that Skylar's use of particular phrases didn't prove she had murdered her baby. They also focused on her mental health, presenting records showing she had been in regular therapy with both a psychologist and a nutritionist. They highlighted her long-standing battle with an eating disorder, which they argued may have affected the baby's development. Photos of Skylar over time revealed her fluctuating weight and fragile physical state. Skylar's attorneys claimed that after delivering the lifeless baby, she tried to comfort the child. They said she intended to eventually tell her family about the pregnancy, but hadn't yet found the courage. According to her doctor, Skylar still had 8 to 10 weeks remaining in her pregnancy at the time and had planned to wait until after prom and graduation to break the news. Fearing a lack of support, an obstetrician who testified for the defense also supported the stillbirth theory. He stated that Skylar's description of the baby's appearance suggested the newborn was not healthy at birth. He further explained that Skylar had only gained 15 pounds during her pregnancy, which could have restricted fetal growth due to her eating disorder. The defense cast doubt on Skylar's police interview, implying she may have simply told investigators what she thought they wanted to hear. They argued that other unknown medical or environmental factors could have contributed to the baby's death, and there was no evidence Skylar had actively harmed her child. The trial lasted just 1 week. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Skylar Richardson was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment. However, she was found guilty of abuse of a corpse, a felony punishable by up to 1 year in prison. The judge ordered that she be held in custody until sentencing the following day. During that hearing, Skylar apologized for her actions and acknowledged the pain she had caused. The judge strongly condemned her conduct, stating that had she made different decisions during her pregnancy, her child might still be alive. Ultimately, Skylar was sentenced to 3 years of probation. The judge emphasized that her actions, while not criminal in the eyes of the jury, were morally reprehensible and deeply troubling. In November 2020, a judge granted Skylar's request for early termination of her probation, nearly 2 years ahead of schedule, acknowledging her progress and concluding she no longer required supervision. Since her acquittal, Skylar has worked to rebuild her life. She completed 2 semesters of college and began working part-time at the law firm that represented her during trial. Despite facing challenges securing full-time employment due to her criminal record, she remains determined to pursue a career in law. Skylar has stated her goal is to attend law school and eventually become a public defender. Liseko had assumed that Celeste was reluctant to start a workplace romance because she was his superior and feared it might damage her career. But now, with that obstacle seemingly removed, he believed nothing stood in the way of their happiness. Overcome with emotion, Liseko impulsively kissed Celeste on the cheek. Shocked by his boldness, Celeste was left speechless. She turned abruptly and fled back into the office without saying a word. Liseko misunderstood her reaction, interpreting her silence as confirmation of mutual feelings. He became more determined than ever not to give up on pursuing her. After he was fired, he created a social media account and sent Celeste a friend request, which she initially accepted. But when he began asking to meet and go out, Celeste politely declined and eventually blocked him, undeterred. Liseko made a new profile and sent her another friend request. Celeste ignored it, but he continued to comment on her public photos, complimenting her looks and suggesting they'd make a great couple. To limit his access, Celeste tightened her privacy settings, restricting comments, messages, and posts to friends only. But a week later, she began receiving romantic text messages from an unknown number. The messages were full of poems admiring her beauty and pleading with her to go out with him. What disturbed Celeste most was that Liz Psycho had never had her personal phone number during their time working together. They had only communicated through work channels. Celeste initially tried to reason with her stalker. She answered one of the calls and firmly explained that there would never be a relationship between them. She urged him to stop contacting her, but instead of backing off, Liz Seiko focused on how much he enjoyed hearing her voice. When she blocked his number, he simply called from different ones. Feeling increasingly harassed and unsafe, Celeste changed her phone number. To her horror, within a week, Liz Seiko somehow obtained the new number and resumed contacting her. For the next 6 months, he stalked her relentlessly through texts, social media, and even in person. His messages escalated from romantic to possessive, and eventually threatening. He began demanding that she meet him. Celeste started noticing Liz Seiko's car parked near her office during the day, and saw him driving past her house at night. At first, she tried to dismiss these sightings as paranoia, but soon realized she was being followed. She went to the police to seek a restraining order, hoping it would legally prevent Liz Seiko from approaching or contacting her. The officers, however, were dismissive. They mocked her concerns and told her that writing poems and sending messages wasn't illegal. Without hard evidence of him stalking her near her home, they refused to take action and told her to leave. The harassment continued. Day after day, Celeste saw his car near her office and her home. Finally, in August 2020, she returned to the police, this time with photos and videos saved on her phone clearly showing Liz Seiko stalking her. A different officer took her complaint more seriously and expressed disbelief at how her earlier report had been handled. He urged her to go directly to court. A restraining order was soon granted, legally forbidding Liz Seiko from contacting or approaching her. For the first time in months, Celeste felt relief, but her peace was short-lived. Less than a month later, she began receiving new messages from unknown numbers. This time, Liz Seiko was begging her to lift the restraining order, claiming it was interfering with their relationship. His tone gradually shifted from pleading to aggressive and entitled. Celeste reported the violation to the police. He was fined and warned that any further breach would lead to serious consequences, including jail time. After that warning, Liz Seiko seemed to vanish. For 2 months, Celeste heard nothing from him. It seemed he was finally out of her life. Then, in September 2020, Celeste met Chris Ridz. They quickly bonded over shared interests and similar values. Their relationship blossomed, and Celeste told him everything about the trauma she'd endured with Liz Seiko. Chris was kind, attentive, and made it his mission to make her feel safe. Again, in early November, Celeste introduced Chris to her family. The dinner went well, and her family welcomed him warmly. She was finally able to enjoy her days without fear. On November 15th, Celeste and Chris went on a date to a cozy cafe. They took a selfie together. Celeste loved it so much, she made it her profile picture. Chris posted it too, writing a heartfelt caption about his feelings for her. It was the last photo ever taken of them, after Chris dropped her off that evening. Celeste spent an hour in the kitchen chatting with her mother, Eggy, before heading to bed early for work the next morning. At around 4 a.m. on November 16th, Eggy was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she thought it came from outside, but then heard banging and screams noises coming from inside the house. She rushed to Celeste's room. When Eggy opened the door, she saw a figure jumping away from Celeste's bed and escaping through a shattered window. She turned on the light and froze. Celeste was lying in a pool of blood, her body covered in cuts and glass shards, gasping for air. Her wide eyes stared upward in panic. Aggie called emergency services and tried desperately to stop the bleeding. But despite her efforts, and those of the paramedics, Celeste died before help could arrive. The medical examiner later found over 20 stab wounds. The fatal blow had pierced her heart. There were numerous defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting Celeste had fought back with all her strength. Investigators concluded that the attacker had broken in through the window and carried out the savage assault in under 3 minutes, just before Aggie entered the room. A large butcher knife had been used in the attack. When police asked if Celeste had any enemies, Aggie immediately named Liz Seiko, who had harassed her daughter for over a year. Friends, co-workers, and family confirmed this at the crime scene. Police found dozens of bloody fingerprints and a trail of blood on a fence left behind as the attacker fled, likely from a cut on his hand. This evidence made it clear Liz Seiko was the prime suspect and had to be apprehended immediately. When he was taken into custody, Liz Seiko claimed he was innocent. He insisted he loved Celeste and would never harm her. But forensic analysis told a different story. His fingerprints were everywhere. Investigators discovered traces of Celeste's blood in her room and on the fence surrounding her property, firmly placing Louis Sasio at the crime scene. A prior restraining order had already been issued, forbidding Luis from approaching Celeste. Notably, just a day before the murder, he was caught on security cameras at a local hardware store, purchasing a hammer and a large knife, the very tools later used in the brutal crime. Luis broke into Celeste's home by smashing a window and then fatally stabbed her. The evidence against him was overwhelming. It became clear he had been stalking Celeste for a long time, studying her every move. What appeared to push him over the edge was a photo she posted online of her new boyfriend. That moment, prosecutors argued, triggered a meticulously planned act of violence. Luis Seo's background was marked by personal instability. At 39, he was unmarried, still lived with his parents, had difficulty maintaining steady employment, and had very few social connections. He also came from a family with a history of mental illness. One of his brothers was serving a long prison sentence for a serious crime. His defense team claimed that Luis needed specialized psychiatric treatment rather than imprisonment. But this argument infuriated Celeste's family, who feared justice would not be served. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed that while Luis did suffer from mental health issues, he was fully aware of his actions and had planned the attack in detail, making him competent to stand trial. The murder trial began in the fall of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death. Leading up to it, Luis attempted to plead insanity and spent much of that time in a psychiatric facility. During court proceedings, he remained disturbingly calm and detached, showing little emotion. Though he admitted to killing Celeste, he claimed his intention was not to end her life, but to somehow win her love. The jury was unconvinced. They unanimously found him guilty on all counts. Luis Seo was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with eligibility for parole only after serving 30 years. During the sentencing, Celeste's grieving parents reminded the court that their daughter had filed a police report against Luis back in 2020, seeking protection. But due to a legal loophole, her complaint had been dismissed. Her death led to a wave of public outcry and legislative reform, with new legal protections becoming known as Celeste's Law. Transition to Winger case. Have you ever heard the story of a nuclear power plant employee from Springfield who had problems with his wife? No, we're not talking about Homer Simpson. This story is far more sinister. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear technician from Springfield, Illinois, murdered his wife by beating her to death with a hammer. But the darkest twist was still to come. He framed another man for the crime, married the family nanny soon after, and lived freely for nearly 4 years. So, how did he manage to get away with it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael. and today we're diving into one of the most twisted true crime stories you've ever heard. In the front seat of Roger Harrington's car, police found a scrap of paper on it where Mark Winger's name, address, and a specific time. At that exact time, Harrington had driven to the Winger residence, entered the home with a coffee mug and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Moments later, Mark Winger dialed 911. He told the dispatcher he had just shot a man who was attacking his wife. According to Mark, he had been working out on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. Grabbing his handgun, he rushed to the main floor and claimed to have seen Roger Harrington striking Donna with a hammer. In an effort to save her, he fired 2 shots at the intruder. When police arrived at the Winger home, both victims, Donna and Harrington, were still clinging to life. Mark was found in a back bedroom, visibly distraught, rocking back and forth in shock. Former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox recalled that the scene was chaotic. You could see both victims from the front door, he said. Donna had suffered at least 7 blunt force injuries to the head. According to Sangamon County Assistant State's Attorney Steve Weinhoft, Harrington, a white male, had 2 gunshot wounds to the head but was still alive when first responders arrived. Detective Cox quickly moved to identify the male suspect before he could be transported. Searching his wallet, they confirmed his identity, Roger Harrington. Near the bodies, police recovered a blood-soaked hammer, Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, a yellow coffee mug, and a pack of cigarettes, all resting on the dining room table. Outside, Harrington's car was suspiciously parked facing the wrong direction on the street, Cox said. Mark appeared devastated and kept asking who the man was that he had killed. When Cox eventually told him the name was Roger, Mark reacted with alarm. "Oh my gosh. That's the man who's been harassing my wife this week." Cox was already familiar with Harrington, who had previously lived in a trailer park Cox owned. "I knew him as a volatile type," he explained. Harrington and his wife had once rented a trailer from Cox, and he recalled how quick-tempered the man could be. "I thought maybe he went there to ask for his job back," snapped, picked up the hammer, and attacked. Then the husband shoots the bad guy. Both Donna and Harrington ultimately succumbed to their injuries. Given Donna's earlier complaint about Harrington, who had once driven her home from the airport and later behaved erratically, and Mark's detailed account, police quickly closed the case. Within just 48 hours, they ruled it a justifiable homicide, concluding Mark had acted in self-defense, but Harrington's family rejected that narrative. Roger wasn't a troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't hurt anybody, said his mother, Helen Harrington. "I don't think he was crazy. I don't believe it." Publicly, the story of a husband defending his wife from a deranged attacker gained sympathy. Behind the scenes, Donna's family was left devastated. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Dresser, recalled the night she got the call. "It was 4 in the morning. I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened.'" Donna's sister Leanne said they just sat in her bedroom, crying over the unimaginable loss. In the months that followed, Donna's mother and sister frequently traveled to Illinois to help care for baby Bailey, who was just an infant when her mother was killed. "I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that was what mattered to me," Sarah Jane said. "But I had to be careful not to ruin my relationship with him, because I didn't want to lose my relationship with Bailey. That little girl made me a grandmother." With Donna gone, Mark was a widower, raising his daughter alone. Donna's family eventually had to return home, and they encouraged him to hire a nanny. In January 1996, Mark met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was looking for a nanny position in the area. Rebecca would later say that from the moment she met Bailey, she felt drawn to her. She had already been through so much at just 3 months old. "It felt like she needed me." Even Donna's family agreed. Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, patient and nurturing, a true blessing in the aftermath of tragedy. Although she felt uneasy being in the home where 2 people had died violently, she was committed to helping. the child grow up in a loving environment. I didn't want to like Rebecca, Leanne admitted, but seeing her with Bailey, there was nothing bad we could say. As time passed, Rebecca's role in the home began to evolve. When you live with someone and you're raising a child together, Rebecca later reflected, it's very easy to start playing house. She said she felt deeply for Bailey, a baby who had effectively lost two mothers before even reaching her first birthday. I wanted to help. I wanted to give her a better life. Mark and Rebecca began spending more time together. Evening. Conversations turned into sharing a glass of wine after Bailey was asleep, and eventually, the relationship became romantic. Within the year, Rebecca became pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii. In October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death, I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly, Rebecca recalled. He told me that, when you've had a good marriage, it makes you want to have that again. Rebecca said Mark had claimed he was infertile, so she was shocked to discover she was pregnant shortly after moving in. I obviously wasn't careful, she said. It was a shock. But Mark, she remembered, was thrilled. To him, it felt like a victory. Rebecca later said Mark pressured her to marry him and have more children. Although he was Jewish when they met, he began attending church with her and expressed a desire to raise their family in a Christian home. In a letter to Rebecca, Mark wrote, I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife. When Rabbi Michael Datz asked Mark about his sudden shift in religious beliefs, Mark replied that Judaism felt too difficult and unforgiving. The rabbi was puzzled and asked, what do you need forgiveness for? Mark didn't respond. It was as if Mark Winger was trying desperately to erase the past. But beneath the surface, something far darker was beginning to unravel. Mark Winger eventually told Sarah Jane Dresser that he planned to sell the house where her daughter, Donna, had died and purchased a new one just outside of town. By then, Mark and his new wife Rebecca had started a family, and he gradually began cutting off contact with Donna's parents. I received a letter from Mark one day, Sarah Jane later said, and it said I could not be called Grandma. Devastated, she wrote back, begging him to reconsider. Please, she pleaded, let her call me Grandma. Mark's response was final. I'm sorry. There's no way I'm going to allow her to call you Grandma, and that's the way it is. Sarah mourned that loss deeply. Bailey Simic, now 25, recalled how her grandparents, Sarah Jane and Ira Dresser, never forgot her. They would send me a birthday card every year, she said. I always asked my mom, who are Sarah Jane and Ira, and she'd explain, they're Donna's parents. They just want you to know they love you and they remember you. Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had been murdered and moved with Rebecca and their growing family to the suburbs outside of Springfield. On the surface, their life looked picture perfect. Mark and Rebecca had 3 children together, and she raised Bailey as her own. Despite some turbulence, Mark seemed like a devoted father and loving husband. But in early 1999, everything began to unravel when Mark fell ill one day. Rebecca took him to the emergency room, the same hospital where Donna had once worked. There, they unexpectedly ran into Donna's best friend and former co-worker, Deanne Schultz. Rebecca noticed that Deanne looked uneasy, and she remembered that Deanne had acted oddly when she first met her, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. Back at home, Mark remarked that they might not have seen the last of Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell. She came forward to police and revealed that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that Mark once told her things would be easier if Donna were dead. She also recalled that shortly after Donna's unsettling ride with cab driver Roger Harrington, Mark told her, I need to get that driver to the house. All you'd need to do is find the body. At the time, Deanne hadn't believed he was serious, but after Donna turned up dead, she was convinced he had done it. Mark had threatened her to stay silent, and she carried the weight of that guilt for years. She even attempted suicide multiple times, but after seeing Mark again in the hospital, she could no longer stay quiet. Her statement prompted investigators to take a second look at what had once been treated as an open and shut case. The more they revisited the evidence, the more troubling questions emerged. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Harrington, allegedly there to attack Donna, carry a cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had both a tire iron and a knife in his car? The most damning piece of evidence came in the form of 3 Polaroid photos, never before seen by investigators. The images had been tucked away among evidence from a civil suit that Mark had filed against Harrington's employer, a transportation company. The positions of the bodies in the photos contradicted Mark's version of events. He had claimed that Harrington was kneeling next to Donna, beating her with a hammer, and that he shot him, causing Harrington to fall backward, supposedly landing with his feet near Donna's head. But the Polaroids showed the opposite, blood spatter. Experts reviewed the scene and confirmed that the physical evidence didn't match Mark's story. I was ashamed of how the investigation was handled. One investigator, Cox, later admitted, "We destroyed Roger Harrington's reputation. We dragged his name through hell for nothing. He was an innocent victim." As it turned out, Harrington had not been an intruder. He had been lured to the Winger home by Mark himself. Detectives also revisited testimony from Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins. She had initially told police that someone had arranged to meet with Harrington that day, and that she'd seen him on the phone making plans. Inside Harrington's car, police found a note written on a bank deposit slip. It listed Mark Winger's name, home address, and the exact time he was expected to arrive. Mark had orchestrated the entire scenario. Dan's cooperation with the reinvestigation, combined with the new evidence, led to the voluntary dismissal of Mark's civil suit against the transportation company. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I had no idea that this whole investigation was happening. I never imagined the police thought my husband might be a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark Winger's arrest. He was taken into custody while at work, Rebecca recalled. "I had made plans to take the kids to McDonald's Playland that day. Then I got a phone call. It was Mark's secretary. She told me he'd been arrested. I went numb. I couldn't stop shaking. I felt like my entire world had collapsed." Still, she struggled with what to believe. "I felt I owed it to him, and to our kids, to stand by him." Donna's sister Hanson also struggled with the news. "I wasn't relieved," she said. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent. This was someone I knew, and now he's in handcuffs. What was going to happen?" Bailey, just 6 years old at the time, remembered the day vividly. "Everyone tried to stay calm. They just told me, 'Dad's going away for a little while, but he'll be back.' But he never came back." On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was formally indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. The trial began in May 2002. Visibly shaken, Dion Schultz took the stand to testify against Mark Winger. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, though there was no evidence implicating her in anything beyond concealing Mark's horrifying secret. Mark was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A critical point the prosecution had to prove was that Roger Harrington had gone to the Winger residence for a scheduled meeting, not to commit a murder. To support this, prosecutors presented evidence: the cigarettes and coffee mug Harrington brought inside, the weapons he had left in his car, and the note he carried with Mark's name and address on it. Mark's defense painted Harrington as mentally unstable and unpredictable, claiming that his erratic behavior suggested he was capable of such violence. But the prosecution countered with powerful visual evidence, Polaroids showing the position of the bodies exactly as they were found. While Mark's attorney suggested first responders may have moved the bodies, investigators and medical experts disagreed. Retired Detective Jim Graham testified that there were no signs of forced entry, and he believed that Roger had been invited in. Once inside, Graham stated, Roger was executed. Donna, hearing the gunshot from the bathroom, emerged only to be bludgeoned to death with a hammer by her husband. Mark then made the 911 call. On the tape, moaning can be heard in the background. He tells the dispatcher he can hear his baby crying, then abruptly hangs up. He also claims Roger had been shot once in the head, but when officers arrived, Harrington had 2 bullet wounds, a detail that directly contradicted Mark's account. Dan's testimony was damning. She revealed that Mark had once said it would just be easier if Donna died. At the time, she dismissed it as a horrible joke. Years later, after unexpectedly crossing paths again, Dion said she confronted Mark, asking how he could live with himself. He allegedly told her, I've found Jesus Christ. I'm forgiven. But he also warned her that if she ever spoke up, we'd both be in trouble. Rebecca Simic, Mark's second wife, said she never believed Dion at first. I didn't think anyone would believe her. I just thought, if Mark really did that, why didn't she come forward right away? Mark's defense tried to discredit Deanne, calling her an emotionally unstable woman, scorned by a failed affair. But her testimony cut through that narrative. She convincingly painted Mark as an unhappy, unfaithful man who had talked openly about killing his wife. Though there was no direct evidence tying Dion to the crime, she was instrumental in establishing Mark's motive. Prosecutor Ed Parkinson said, she was a key witness in showing us what Mark was thinking and why he did it. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca recalled that she fully expected him to come home with them. But when the word guilty echoed through the courtroom, she said, I just wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Donna's sisters, including Sarah Jane Dresser, were there for the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she remembered. But the story didn't end there. 4 years later, Mark was sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison after being caught trying to hire a hitman to silence Dion Schultz, the very woman whose testimony helped convict him. He even plotted to have a childhood friend killed after the friend refused to pay his bail. For Roger Harrington's mother, Helen, the outcome was bittersweet. We always knew Roger was innocent, and now it's finally been proven. He was branded a murderer at the time, but the truth came out. Police, too, had to confront the consequences of their flawed investigation. I was ashamed, said Detective Doug Cox. I dragged Roger Harrington's name through the mud for no reason. He was an innocent victim. Detective Bram echoed that sentiment. The department closed the case too quickly. We missed things, but finally being able to right that wrong, it felt good. Still, for Rebecca and her children, closure never came. When someone dies, you have a funeral. You gather. You grieve, she said. But when someone goes to prison, what do? There's just this emptiness. A hole that never really gets filled. It wasn't just Mark who got sentenced to life, she continued. We did too. Bailey Simic, Mark, and Rebecca's daughter, described what it was like growing up without a father. It was hard. At school, seeing other kids with their dads, suddenly I couldn't go to my dad's room or have him pick me up. He just wasn't there anymore. Ben Simic was only a year old when his father went to prison. I look at the pictures, and I see that kid. That kid had no idea what was going on. Rebecca was forced to leave Springfield with the children. Their home was foreclosed, and after 7 years as a stay-at-home mom, she had no choice but to file for bankruptcy. Everything was taken from us, she said. All I had left to give my kids was love. She never remarried and raised all 4 of her children on her own. Over time, Bailey reconnected with Donna Winger's family. It was incredible to see there's this whole big family that still loves me, she said. Sarah Jane even has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all the other grandkids. We were all hurt by the same person, but it didn't break us. Donna's family later launched Donna's Fund, a charitable initiative under the organization Women in Distress, aimed at supporting women fleeing abusive relationships. Her legacy will live on, Sarah Jane said, through the people we help, and through the beautiful memories we keep of her.